So my mom, she passed away. Then all of a sudden, my greedy aunt comes out of the woodworks. I haven't even talked to this woman in years. And she's saying that now that my mom is dead, I'm the one who has to pay all her debt and pay off what she owes to my aunt. So I decide to tell her this. Ella was my mother's name. She was a complicated woman, and although she raised me the best she could, I feel it wasn't enough to speak well of her today. She was always a headache and a pain in the butt for me. Sorry for the language. Although she encouraged me from a young age about the things like the importance of money. She did a lot of practices that anybody would call morally wrong, or scams, cheating, and everything else in the book. She did it all so that she could achieve two things: a good upbringing for her son and a good upbringing for her son amid luxury. It was thanks to these things that we were able to have not only a comfortable home, but a kitchen always full of food and several vacations, which I don't really enjoy because I'd always learned something fundamental since I was a kid. What my mom did was not right. A lot of people got hurt by those practices, and one of the lowest points was a lady who I met precisely 1 year before Mom and I drifted apart. Sometimes I think that if I had not met her, things would have been very different. I met this lady at a brief but a good vacation gig that I had before I entered college. It was a furniture cleaning, and the lady, old and very nice, told me that this furniture was what she had left of her husband, who had passed away years ago. Blah, 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 right? The point is that she mentioned that I reminded her physically of a woman who had ripped them off years ago, and that she had never been able to recover from that occasion. It made me feel so bad that I basically gave away that day's worth of work for free. Although the company I worked for was a little upset about it, at least I was able to, in part, pay back some of the damages that my mother has done. Well, however, by talking to my best friend, he told me that I did not have to do this kind of thing. He simply made me understand that I had to detach myself to do this kind of thing. I needed to detach myself a little bit from my mother's life, because knowing how I am, quite reserved, few words, kind, somehow naive, the life I had in store with her was not going to be as well linked with the one that I intended to have. It was then that I made a bold decision. I told my mother about this event, and she just told me part of her philosophy that the world is ruled by the strong and cunning, and the weak and naive were just passing through. A very, very political thought, if you ask me. That's what I said to her. I said that, and she tells me that what was she doing was no different from what the upper echelons of power were doing. We're talking politics, religion, tycoons. They were doing the same thing. It was all just an endless cycle of bullies taking advantage of others, and I told her I wanted no part of it. Since I could see that she was not going to change even in the face of her son's pleas, I decided to do something quite daring. I decided to change my name. See, I was born her last name because my father abandoned us when Mom was still pregnant. I want to believe that this is why she became the way she is, but my Aunt Eve tells me that Mom has always been like this, since she was just a little girl. Pregnancy only amplified that behavior, so I decided to adopt the last name of my great-grandmother, my grandpa's mom. This did not sit well with her at all, let alone when I had to leave for college. She knew she would not see me for a long time, and even though I told her I would be writing and visiting regularly, she always kept her head down, applying the same silent treatment, waiting for me to come back and apologize, but she did not. For more than a year, our dynamic was quite bland, seeing each other 3 or 4 times, so on the 5th and last occasion I had to go to the house as an emergency, because she had suffered an accident, respiratory complications, maybe because of that dang habit of smoking like a chimney. That's what made the whole process fast and fulminant. In a matter of minutes, she was no longer in this world, leaving me as an orphan when I barely came of age. And that's why I'm writing this to you guys today, as sort of a vent about how my mother's life was like. The funeral, it was 2 days ago, and I saw so many new faces in the family. In reality, they went for me. Uncles, cousins, and people who were somehow related to us, but who I never knew because of my mom's black sheep status. They all offered their condolences, and although some did not remember her as well, they still paid their respects, offering to help me with whatever I needed. That makes me a little annoyed, actually. Be a bad person in life and there will still be a few people at your funeral. It doesn't seem like a logical world to live in. The only person I had the weirdest encounter with was my Aunt Eve, who said with a very serious tone that we needed to discuss a few things about my mom and her will. Don't know what she meant by that, but she also said that she would talk about it in a few days. Meanwhile, I should mourn my mom, and even if we did not spend too much together this past year, man, I think things won't be the same. Update number 1. I did not think much of it at the time, but my Aunt Eve, my mom's younger sister, pulled me aside at one point after the funeral, saying that she would have to discuss some legal matters about my mom's issue later. At first, I came to believe that this was some money that would be used to cover some expenses and such, but now I see that this is not the case. It's been a few days since the funeral, and my spirits are in the dumps, as you would expect from anybody in my situation, but the call from my aunt fell terribly on me. First, she asked me how I've been doing, but it was just to cover up to get her claws out and throw me a question that would freeze me to death. "Do you have the money, darling?" Well, I asked her what she meant, and she admitted that she had not told me about it after the funeral, as she wanted to find a time when, quote, I would not be so sensitive. My mother just passed away, and I don't think there will be a good time for that in a while. She told me that my mom owed her a certain amount of money, and that now I had to pay her back, and, one way or the other. When she told me the amount, I felt a bad sweat roll down my back. It wasn't as much as I expected, but it wasn't something I could pay for all at once. In itself, the money I had left was to pay for college, since I decided not to accept my mom's dirty money. And now I was in big trouble for that. I told her to excuse me, but that I had no way of getting that money as soon as possible, and that's when she dropped the other bombshell. "Oh, don't worry, you can pay me that right now and the rest in the next 10 months. I didn't understand what she meant, and she told me it would be 10 months of that amount. I still did not understand. The woman doesn't know how to make herself clear, and she explained that my mother had promised her a payment of 10 times the amount that she lent her. Well, I swear that for a moment I thought I was going to faint. As I said, the amount itself was not exorbitant, but it wasn't small either. Now imagine having to pay 10 times as much. It was basically impossible. If anything, my mother's funeral was a little mini vacation I was able to have, since I'm now swamped with evaluations in my part-time job. I don't have time to breathe, and somehow that woman wants me to give her 10 times the amount? I don't know, it doesn't seem like a fair situation. As we're talking about it, it was my mother's debts, and that should not apply to me. My aunt luckily said that she would have to hold the call and that we would talk after that, but now I'm looking for a way to get out of the situation entirely. Update number 2. I've already talked to my aunt, but the outlook is not good for me. I was talking to her on the phone, and I told her that I had no way of giving her that amount of money in the time frame that she was asking for it for. So I told her sarcastically that I would have to drop out of college to pay it, which is obviously not in my plans. She took it seriously and told me that if I wanted to, she might as well give me a job on her farm to make up for it. I don't know how that would help her, but this is getting out of hand on both sides, and I say this because I've been in conversations with my cousin Raw, my aunt's son, and he tells me that she doesn't really need the money immediately, but only to secure it and perhaps to put a little psychological terror in me. What's more, she had already marked that money as lost years ago, just like many others when they accept that they're no longer going to recover the money that she diverts from them. But from that to her taking it out on me to make me the victim is one of the worst moments of my existence in this world. It's, a very narrow stretch, I know. Knowing this in subsequent calls, I told her that, with much embarrassment, I could not make it up to her, since, that was not my responsibility. You know what? She took it very personally. And instead of handing over the money only more immediately, if my mom was known for her tendency to swindle, Aunt Eve is more of a pushy type. And when she sees the things that are not going her way, she moves heaven and earth to achieve her goal. The argument got worse and worse, and she insisted that I work on her farm to pay off the debt. Now, my no was a resounding and definite no. She even went so far as to send me a picture of the document where my mother stated that she would repay my aunt 10 times the amount she borrowed. Aunt Eve said that she agreed to this loan because she knew that if it did not work out, my mom would have to find other ways to repay the debt. At one point, I stopped answering her, and she started calling me insistently, from different phone numbers, and I don't know how much longer I can keep ignoring everything. What I fear the most is that there will be a legitimate way for me to get involved in all this, and if so, well, I guess I won't have time to mourn my mom anymore, because I'll be mourning something else. Update number 2. My aunt was a person full of hope. She was somebody who had a simple dream, but ambition made it burn out quickly. She wanted a farm, a place where she could live off of, where she could produce what she wanted, but once she had that, things changed. She found a good business within the farm world and began to collect what she needed to improve her machinery, her livestock, and her distribution. However, she lacked more, and that's when my mom entered the formula. Aunt Eve knew very well what her sister was doing, and so she began to borrow some money from her, which her sister occasionally lent her. But still, she just always boasted of her moral decency and paid it back, even with some interest, which won some of my mother's confidence. In itself, this was what made her business prosper, and to a certain extent, my mother loved it, since she felt that her little sister was at least doing something good for the world. But since my mother was my mother, it was to be expected that she would take advantage of that. So as the years dwindled by, it was she who began to ask for the money. My mother used to do something that earned her many, many enemies. She would borrow money and pay it back as soon as possible. She didn't spend it, but set it aside, and in a day or two she would pay it back. That way she would generate enough trust so that the people who helped her would help her again and again and again, only with higher amounts. And that's when Mom would disappear from their lives entirely, or make excuses, or at best, die. Of course, the latter she didn't do on purpose, but she had a backup plan for her. It was me. Even if she didn't want to admit it, she benefited from me changing my name, because that was the way she would not make me a direct heir to her will, as she left everything to her son with the first and last name, but nothing to do with me now. I tried to tell this to my aunt, but she would not listen. She sent me several threats, even saying that if I did not pay, she would take this to an extreme and that I was going to regret it. We would go to legal terms, and I told her I wasn't afraid of her, and I decided to block her by every possible means. And I even told my cousin that for the time being it was better not to have any communication at all, and he accepted it, telling me that she was very intense on the farm, occasionally saying that she would not rest until she made me pay the debt in full. And that is not the worst part, guys. No. Indeed, I'll tell you how far this problem has escalated, and now my own university is involved. One day, I was leaving class when one of the professors called me saying that the rector wanted to talk to me urgently, and I did not know what it could possibly be. So, upon arriving, I find, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, America's favorite character, my aunt. She was red-eyed, as if she's been crying all night, and she said to the rector, "It's him," as she shot me the most disrespectful glare. It was then that she started in with a pitiful speech, saying that my mom and I have swindled her and that the money we took from her we used for college tuition. She even showed the documentation to the assistant rector, verifying my mother's signature, and they even told me that if it were true, that would be a serious offense and the worst thing possible could happen. I could be expelled from the university or even arrested for fraud. I explained my whole situation to them, telling them that it was my mom's actions and that I had absolutely nothing to do with it. I even told them about the name change, which seemed to coincide with everything. And of course then my aunt, the sneaky one, said that I have done this on purpose precisely to get out of the matter and thus go unpunished. That meant that I had the worst of it. The rector was annoyed that his office had become this kind of family drama courtroom, and so he was just about to give a capital sentence to set the record straight. It was then his assistant, bless her soul, spoke up.
Excuse me, ma'am, but according to this documentation, this was done a few months ago, when the boy had already paid his tuition.
It was true. It had nothing to do with each other, and besides the fact that the only other person who helped me pay the tuition was Grandpa, who was not in any of the agreements. Therefore, I had nothing to do with any of it, and the whereabouts of the money would only be known to my mother in the afterlife. Even so, the rector said that I could pay her when I finished college, so I would have a job and more time to dedicate to the debt. I understand that he wanted to help me, but I feel that he was not doing it in the best way. But she insisted that I had to pay her all at once, in cash money. And when we told her that this was not possible because I'm a student, my aunt went absolutely ballistic. But seriously, she went crazy. She starts screaming, she starts kicking, starts pointing fingers at everybody in the room, and even had the intention of assaulting. It was chaos in the rector's office, something that frankly made me very, very embarrassed of. And when the security people finally arrived, they were screaming at the top of their lungs that my mother and I were heartless scammers, and that everybody would have to watch out for me. Hell of a way to leave an impression at the university, huh? Update number 3. Sorry for cutting the last update so abruptly. It was late at night and I wanted to fall asleep. Anyways, about my aunt, well, I'll try to say it as best as I can. She threatened me that if I did not give her the money, she would go back to college and I would get in serious trouble. I told her that would only be detrimental to her, and she understood that indeed it was, but I lied a little about that because such a fuss was made in the dean's office that he made a threat to me too, saying that I should control my family affairs. Next time I would be expelled without a second thought. Aunt Eve even went so far as to call up some lawyers who knocked on the door of my residence to take me to an office. Believe me, it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, as I thought at one point that they would even go and take me somewhere else, considering that my aunt had paid for more than just lawyers, but that was simply not the case. Instead, they took me to their office where they told me the terms of the lawsuit. There were a lot of legal issues, guys. That had to do with payment time stipulated by my mom. They threatened me with serious reprisals that could even land me jail time. And in desperation, I went so far as to tell them once again that I could make the payments once I got out of college. But according to my aunt's orders, she needed the money now. For a bunch of reasons that neither she nor they believed. Leaving with the threat, I went to the only person who could help me with this regard, which was Grandpa. He was the one who helped pay for the college tuition without resorting to loans in the first place. He's a man of few words. He was always happy to have me visit, but my mother, that's another story. The relationship between them was always rocky. So he wanted me to move in with him if I needed a different place to go after college, and so he told me not to worry about the Aunt Eve thing, since he would figure out a way to get me out of it. He called up his lawyers, but it was like something out of the blue. His lawyers came up with a rather sad solution. My aunt said that if I did not appeal her demand, she was going to take the house as part of the payment, because according to her, my mother mortgaged the house for it, a fact she mysteriously kept to herself until the last minute. So I came to believe it was fake, false, phony. But false or not, the outcome bounced back in her face, since according to an investigation, we found out that my mom had already mortgaged the house 4 times. Yeah, 4 big times. It's crazy. Other people were in the same condition as my aunt, but nothing could be done about it because the owner of the place passed away. So any contract was null and void.
My aunt's expression was one of terror. She was simply speechless. She said nothing. She became very, very, very pale, and at one point I felt like she was actually going to pass out. Her lawyers, they tried their best to do something about it, but no avail. At one point, we even thought that we were going to press coverage, because it was a story that's been going around the neighborhood since my aunt's incident at the university went viral. At no point did she ever speak to me again. She was too dejected to say a word, and while I would err on the side of saying I was unhappy, what I can tell you, it was a weight off my shoulders, and unlike my mother's death, this is something that could be of use to me in the future. Of course, it's the other people who come with the issue of the house as collateral show up. They will also be in for a huge disappointment. I tried to talk to Aunt Eve, but she just turned away in defeat and left. From what I heard from my cousin, she hasn't left the farm in days and has gotten to the point of always sending somebody to do her errands. She doesn't want to interact with anybody in town. On a final note, I should say that I went to visit my mother at the cemetery yesterday. It was somewhat of a shock because I found what appeared to be traces of green paint on her grave. No need to investigate to find out what happened. Still, it doesn't feel quite right. At the end of her life, her little trick played on all those people, including her sister. I don't support her, but given the scenario she ended up becoming, I feel it was more than deserving, and at one point I considered cleaning up the grave. But my mom was always a very flashy woman who liked bold colors, so I decided to leave it for her. I know she would have liked it. If I could see her again, I wouldn't tell her to get her wrongs in orders, as I know she wouldn't. I would just tell her that I'm doing well. I'm eating well. I have good grades. I have good friends. Without a house to live in because of her, but hey, with my Vita very high for the future. Final update. I got to talk to my cousin just a few days ago. We were talking about the house that my aunt has and how the affair ended. You ready for this one? It's difficult to go through all these emotions at such a delicate period of your life. I went through so many things that I didn't even have time to mourn my own mom. The vacation season's coming to an end, and I'm already going into the second year of my career. We talked about my aunt and how she's been pretty secluded from the outside world after everything that went down. She doesn't speak to the family, and they all give her the same treatment they gave my mom. Well, to everyone, it's like she's already dead. And I'm sure she'll only see them again at her funeral. Well, it's like she's dead already. It's a very sad thing, if you ask me. Sure, that happened to her because she was greedy, but still, I don't feel she deserved 100% of the blame. After all, she was part of the huge list of people ripped off by my mom. In a way, I understand her position, but it wasn't the best way to go about it, no. If she had done it in a better way, maybe she would have won me over or even swept the floor with me in paperwork. I've also spoken to Grandpa, with whom I now have a better relationship with. While before it was merely a formal relationship because of my college payments, he's now considering something a little more daring. Since the house was repossessed by the bank, he wants to buy it and give it to me outright. A pretty sharp move, since that means that the people who had the house foreclosed on will be left without their full payout. Well, anyways, I hope they don't throw bottles at the house. Mind you, the house will now be in my name, without having any legal relationship with my mom, so it'll be, in a sense, a fresh start. It'll be mine once I finish graduation, and wow, having a house all to yourself in your 20s? Well, that looks like a pretty big deal. Even if the house is the house you've had all your life, I don't condone my mom's actions, and I never will. But I'm glad that in the end, it all turned out well for me. Meanwhile, my aunt is on the farm, biting her nails and looking for a new way to make money. My cousin told me she was even thinking of going into the scam world. But he, like me, told her that if she did that, not to count on him. I'm glad that at least this generation still has a trace of dignity.
The aunt showing up to the college to raise a scene is just such toxic behavior. And I do want to do a quick shout out to the grandpa of today's story, because honestly, without the grandpa in today's video, I don't think OP would have gotten away with a lot of the things that he was able to get away with. going to college, getting the aunt off his back. I mean, the list just goes on and on. I do want to hear from you guys. Maybe you can give an inside perspective of somebody that's been in a similar situation out there. Drop it down below in the comment and let me know if you would have done something different sitting in the predicament that OP was. Guys, thank you for joining me today. My name's Mr. Redito. I narrate stories every single day. The best way not to miss out on any of these juicy drama stories, the simplest way is to subscribe to the channel and also check out my other 2 channels for even more daily videos. That is going to be Mr. Redito's Stories and Mr. Redito's Revenge. Guys, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. And of course, remember, it's cool to be kind. Peace.